Yeah, great advice. Maybe just a little bit of, don't want to spend a lot of time on the challenges, but nonetheless, one area that might be of interest, and with Nandan and Jill, we have kind of a unique situation where both of them have, basically, running companies that started in academia. And maybe just a quick thought about, how do you think about the challenges of dealing with tech transfer offices or getting the right type of licenses. And then I'll go back to, Chris and Rich, once you have that, are there any concerns on the investor or banking side in terms of, what about royalties? What about maintenance agreements? So maybe Jill and Nandan talk a little bit about any particular, I guess, opportunities, but what are there more challenges in getting, a new company basically spun out of academia?
The tech transfer offices can be true bottlenecks. I wish they were run as for-profit businesses. And you can see the tech transfer office at Harvard Medical School, I think, does a much better job. You can't saddle a startup to be with upfront fees. I understand the legal costs are a lot. And a lot of times you don't fit in as a commodity where they can see that this is going to be this value. Also, these agreements need to end at some point. They can't be into perpetuity, and people need to think about that. I made the tech transfer office very rich at Harvard with what I invented in my PhD. So they like me over there. And that goes with the investments too. If you make investors money once, they'll always come back. Sometimes the problem is, I think the reason we were able to raise so much for our seed, we raised a little over 5 million, is because I had done this several times before, and the team wasn't just academic. And investors do look like I have way too much tech and way too much academia on my team. But I kind of positioned the other founders as Renaissance men. So they weren't just tech in one direction, but they were tech overall. And they also had sort of entrepreneurial skills throughout their lives. And it's one of those comfort levels for investors. You also have to know how to work with people who are very academically minded. I think there's a joke from MIT, you give an engineer a problem, it's never done. It's never finished. And you have to, as a company, you need to deliver, even if it's your alpha. And at some point you need to just cut it off. This is how much we're doing. And then we're delivering it because we need the feedback. It's tough. But I look at myself as the translator and the bridge between the business and the science team, and give both the respect and hoping for diversity of thought and cross-pollination, that people can transition and be on the business team and also talk to the tech team, because I never want, part of our brand is that we know what we're doing. So I don't want anyone to come across as a used car salesman, like they just want to close the deal, but they have no idea how to explain AI. So those are like the tough things. The other thing you have to think about is your founders, your other founders, if you have any, and your first few hires. That's who you're going to make or break this company with.
Yeah, no, great advice. Nandan, how are things at the University of Colorado?
I think, and I'll echo a little bit of what Jill said, but I think, more positive tone as far as the academic relationship. I'll say a couple of things there. I mean, University of Colorado not only has been a spin-out partner, they're also an investor, a small investor in the company. So I think, given that they wear a couple of different hats with us, I think the relationship has been smooth. I mean, one thing I would say to all entrepreneurs, and like Jill, perhaps, this is probably my fourth or fifth spin out of an academic situation. And, I mean, there's different strokes for different folks, but it always takes time. It always takes time. I think, allow enough time for agreement discussion, signing, execution, those kinds of things, allow enough time. It's not just about bureaucracy. It is just part of the process. But I think we've been able to navigate that pretty well. But I would say a couple of other points that perhaps Jill alluded to one way or another. One is about hiring. I think whether it was from the early stages of the company and going forward, bringing the right early people into the team, continuing to grow, and it's not just about skill sets. It's a fit with the culture. It is, and certainly in the Boston ecosystem, we're fortunate that we do have a great pool of skills. But I think, beyond just the skill sets, I think the culture, the ability to actually work within a startup environment, do everything that's needed, and being one with that mindset. I think that's pretty important. And I would say adapting to the market. I mean, that's maybe again that's a cliche, but I think what we've seen is what the investors want, what your stakeholders as a board wants, what your team wants. I mean, there can be multiple different viewpoints at times. I think converging those in the best way possible, adapting to the market, probably without bending too much, and staying close to your passion. I think that continues to be a tight balance for any company. But I think, whether as a CEO, whether as an executive team, steering that in the right direction, throughout, and making sure it grows close to your passion, but grows as an adaptation to what the market needs. I think, continues to be a focus for any company.
Great.
Yeah,
Chris,
I'll provide
how do
it.
you-
Yeah. Just on your main point about all the technologies, especially coming out of academia. The reality is, although it's not a fun thing to say, is that the majority of research projects out of academia will not get funding. They'll not be turned into companies. They'll not see success, with multiple rounds, even if they get some seed capital. And so I think one of the informative things to think about is when you talk to investors, most of them will only invest in a small fraction, maybe 5% or less than that, of the things that they look at. And so really understanding what is it that separates the companies that you fund versus those that you say no to. And it's hard to get that when you only talk to folks who've got funding, right? Because they're not understanding why they say no to so many. And I would argue that until you have, let's say, $10 million, right, of capital, you really should focus on how you're going to advance the technology and de-risk it and produce a data set with that, right? That, as Jill said earlier, increases the value. And when you increase the value, you also increase the likelihood that other investors are going to be interested, that you're further along, further de-risked. And so I think before you build out a big team, before you, right, figure out what your board of directors is, make sure you have a good story, that you've explained your technology well, and that you have a plan, whether you're getting $500,000 or $50,000 or, $3 million. What are you going to do with that? And the more that you can focus on deploying that capital for the technology in the program. And again, I'm not glamorizing this, but we meet a lot of entrepreneurs that have been sleeping on their friend's couch, right, for the last, a few years. They recognize that there's going to be plenty of time, right, to get, big salaries, build big teams, right, get a nice office, et cetera. And you need to use that early capital to advance the technology, to de-risk it. And if we see more than 20% of the budget to go to G&A, which is essentially salaries and that sort of thing, we kind of, shrug a little bit, because, in the early days, you can still be quick, you can be efficient. But if you've got $2 million, right, you don't want to have $1 million going to paying salaries, right? If you can double the chance that you're going to, advance the technology and increase value. So I think that it's a different game when you're early stage and looking for that first seed capital. And I think it's more about the story and what you're going to do with that money and how you're going to advance the technology and de-risk it.
Makes sense. And Rich, I'm curious, as you said, your role goes way beyond the banking, but I suspect you have an opportunity with a lot of entrepreneurs to provide a little bit what Chris said. I mean, a little bit of, realistic, feedback and maybe a little bit of tough love to make sure that, they haven't fallen in love with their idea, but they're not looking at it from the right perspective. So curious how you provide that value to kind of keep people or get people on the right track.
Yeah, no, look, I think there's no question, excuse me, the setting yourself up with the right sort of outside partners is critical in this type of thing. The right law firms, the right banks, the right people that are going to, like you said, give you the hard truths. And I would say even beyond that, look, there is so much out there. This is kind of piggybacking off what Chris has said, and sort of expense management and making the dollar last. That's such a critical piece, especially early on, especially with seed money or fairly small dollars in the early days. There are banks like ours, that are dying to bring these companies in and are offering all kinds of terrific, freebies basically. Like you can get your HR and payroll services covered. You can get free 409A valuations. There's a lot of really cool things as you explore when you're, who these partners, these infrastructure partners are going to be. A lot of law firms will effectively, defer costs so that, you can, they'll get you eventually. They're law firms, obviously, but just again, it's getting in front of the right people. Look, we've got a lot of resources around us, and as we're coming up through these various accelerators and things like that I think relying on that and making sure that you're from a banker standpoint, don't walk into Bank of America and open a checking account and hope that you're going to get something out of that, because you're not. There are banks that are focused on helping you from an advisory standpoint, helping you from a cost standpoint. And so that's an important piece of it, I think, that as Chris was alluding to.